Hey, friends. Hey, before we get started, don't miss my classes at the Fiber Fabric Craft Festival, May 2nd and 3rd at the Donald E. Stephens Convention Center in Rosemont, Illinois. It's just a few miles from Chicago O'Hare Airport. There's a panty party on May 2nd featuring 3 underwear styles and a full kit of essentials to make it easy for you to get started. And there's sewing with stickers. Learn clever adhesive tricks for organizing your sewing and get giveaways from Avery Labels. Spots are limited, so sign up now at fiberfabriccraft.com. Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolfork. I'm a 4th-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together. Hey friends, hey, it's Lisa from Black Women Stitch and the Stitch Please podcast. And as I say every other week, this is a very special episode because this episode is going to tell you how you can use what your machine already has. And this is where I'll talk about some of the features of the decorative stitches that are already built into your machine. Sometimes they feel like they're kind of hidden. And so I wanted to show you how to find them. Now, I looked at 3 sewing machines, one that was $100, one that was $500, and my own. I looked at the manuals for these machines, and I want to talk about what's built in already. So we'll start with the $100 machine. This is a very popular machine. Lots of beginners use it. Carmen used it for the Black Sewing Network Sewing Machine Battle and Style Challenge. That machine has 32 stitches. The next machine I looked at is a $500 machine, and that one has 50 stitches. I looked at my own machine, which costs more than both of those combined and multiplied. It has 573 stitches. That's a lot of stitches. 283 decorative, 20 satin stitches, 61 decorative satin stitches, 14 cross stitches, 58 combinable utility stitches. That's a lot of stitches. And I use a lot of them, but I'm not going to sit here and say that I use 10%. I've used quite a few. Well, I think I have used more than 10%. Mind your own sewing stitches, okay? This is a judgment-free zone, okay? What I want us to think about is that all of the machines from the $100 level to the $10,000 level have a variety of decorative stitches that are overlooked. And what I want to talk about is what they do and how you can find them. Here are some of the stitch categories that these stitches fall into. They could be utility stitches, they're stretch stitches, they're decorative stitches. Buttonholes are one of those examples that many of us are familiar with as a utility stitch. There's also heirloom style. This means that there's stitches, they're already programmed, they're already accessible, they're usable for construction, for finishing, and for decoration. So if you have a domestic sewing machine, you have these stitches somewhere in that machine. Now, how do we find these stitches? I'll begin again with the $100 machine. So this machine has a dial in the front. That's called the stitch selector dial. You turn that stitch selector dial to the symbol for whatever decorative stitch you want. The stitches are printed right there on that selector dial. You can then use stitch S1 or S2 to get additional stitches. That lets you adjust the width and the length. So the machines also have ways to adjust the stitch length, which will change how that decorative stitch looks. And you can do that with the width dial and the length dial. Looking at the $500 machine, that machine has a series of buttons. So you select this stitch that you need there using buttons. The display will show the stitch number, the stitch width, and the stitch length. And you can modify it with probably with arrows from there. Now, looking at my own machine, which is what I know the best after using it for so long, I find mine by going into the window. It's 3 tabs on the sewing machine interface. So I select the decorative character stitches and I go through and adjust the needle position, the stitch width, the stitch length, and that's how I find and modify mine. The point is to consider how you can find these stitches. On my machine, it's based on categories. You can find different categories of stitches in the machine. For the $500 machine, the stitches are all numbered and you select a number. And then for the $100 machine, it's a symbol. You can find it using a symbol. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the zigzag stitch. This is important because many of the innovations and the reasons we're able to have these decorative stitches is because of the zigzag stitch. Back in the days when the sewing machine was first invented, it just sewed straight stitches in one direction. And you could sew backwards, but people were instead encouraged, like you pivot and then go back, because I think when you turn the wheel, it didn't work the same backwards as forwards. So the zigzag stitch allows for this lateral, well, as the sewing machine advanced and started to be able to sew backwards just as well as forwards, that the zigzag became an important innovation. I think of it as like the gateway stitch to, or a bridge to more stitching creativity. The zigzag stitch, as you know, is a side to side stitch. Oh, and I love to tell you this amazing Black history fact, American history fact, is that the zigzag stitch is associated with a patent held by Garrett A. Morgan. And he was the inventor of the 3-way traffic signal and the gas mask and so many other things. And I love that he has a hand in the history of sewing. Now, the zigzag stitch is a repeated side to side stitch. It's a V pattern that when you put one on top of the other, it goes side to side. You zig to the left and you zag to the right. Now, the application for this stitch shows up for edge finishings. People use it for stretch seams, applique, couching, cording. It's the foundation for bar tacks and buttonholes, as well as stitching on buttons. And while I'm here, if you have the capacity to control the stitch width and the stitch length of your sewing machine that has a zigzag stitch, you can put flat buttons on, not shank buttons, but flat buttons, the kind with the 2 or 4 holes. You can put those on with the sewing machine. My machine has a dedicated foot that's designed just for that. You can buy sewing machine presser feet that will allow you to do that. There's a little tongue that kind of sticks out. You put the button on top and it leaves a little gap at the bottom. I don't necessarily need that for my buttons, but it's something you can have. So let me just tell you really quickly how the zigzag stitch, which is a stitch you have, can work for this purpose. So this is how you start. You will take off the regular presser foot that your sewing machine has on it. And you don't want to use that presser foot because what it does is the pressure of it can crack your button. So we do not want cracked buttons. So we want to be careful with doing it. And that's one of the reasons why there is a dedicated buttonhole foot. But if you want to try it, just give it a try. Let me show you how again. You're going to take off the snap-on foot that you have. You will lower your presser bar onto the button. You select the zigzag stitch. Set the stitch length to 0. Hand crank the set. You're going to set the stitch length to 0, and that will keep the feed dogs from moving, and it keeps your stitch in place. You're going to use the hand wheel to set the width of your zigzag so that it matches the holes. Now, once you get clearance between the needle and the hole of the button, you can then hit the presser foot and let it zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. Change your stitch length from a zigzag stitch to a straight stitch. Make sure that stitch length is at 0 as well. And then that you can use to make a knot by just stitching it 3 times, down, 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 pulling it off the machine and tying a knot in the back. Or if your machine knots off by itself, it'll knot off. The reason that this works is because the zigzag stitch uses the stitch width to span the buttonholes. And so this is one reason or example of when a stitch you already have can be used to do something you might not have tried yet. Now, before we dive into the different stitches, let me explain also in the same ways that the stitch width and stitch length can change how a stitch performs, the needle has a lot to do with it too. So for your standard and general stitching, I tend to use things that are appropriate for the fabrics, and I recommend that you do that as well. So if you're going to be working with a knit, use a ballpoint on a jersey or use a stretch needle. I much love a stretch needle. It works really well on the knits that I use. A wing needle is a very cool needle, and it is a needle that has wings on the side that cut the fabric as it stitches. And this is something that you can practice, and you can find these needles wherever you get your needles. It should be next to where you find these needles. The twin needle, that's another kind of specialty needle that will give you a really cool and fun result with any stitch that you choose, but especially for one of the decorative stitches that we're exploring today. So I want to talk about what these stitches can do. I like using these decorative stitches there's a kind of a whole list of them, but they can be used as stretch and reinforcement stickers. They can be used as stretch and reinforcement stitches. I'm excited to share that I'll be teaching at the Fiber and Fabric Craft Festival in Rosemont, Illinois, April 30th through May 3rd, 2026 at the Donald E. Stevens Convention Center, just a few miles from Chicago O'Hare Airport. This new consumer event from the organizers of H&H Americas features hands-on classes, workshops, and an exhibit hall full of creative inspiration, including 220 vendors. I'm teaching Panty Party on Saturday, May 2nd, a 6-hour class where we sew 3 styles of undies, and Sewing with Stickers on Sunday, May 3rd, all about the surprising uses for everyday adhesives and sewing, plus giveaways from Avery Labels. Learn more at fiberfabriccraft.com, and I hope to see you there. And what do I mean by that? I mean, let's take, for example, our very first one. I talked all of this stuff about zigzag stitches, and my first stitch to discuss is a straight stitch. I'm talking about the triple straight stitch. This is a straight line that looks thicker because each stitch is repeated forward and backward. So when it's sewing, it's going forward, 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 back, forward. Anyway, I'm not going to narrate what that looks like. It looks on your machine probably like if you compare how your regular straight stitch looks, it looks a little heavier, or there's 3 lines, one next to the other. What this does, it reinforces seams. It's good for top stitching. It's good to reinforce stress points. I read that some folks like to use this for their jeans decorative seams on the side. So you have a flat fell seam inside the jeans, and you want to top stitch that outside, and you want it to be visible. If you use the right needle and this triple stitch plus some good thread, it's going to look really amazing. So that triple stitch provides reinforcement, but also decoration. And it works because it's stronger than a regular straight stitch. It adds durability, and it provides a teeny tiny bit of stretch, but I wouldn't call it a stretch stitch. Some people do, but I would not. Now, we're going to turn to some of the zigzag stitches and some of the decorative stitches, and this will bring me to one of my favorite. That is the 3-step zigzag. Now, a 3-step zigzag is a zigzag stitch made of 3 small stitches per side. It forms a stepped zigzag, like a zigzag line. So it's going like dot, 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 like an elongated, very elongated. It is such a great stitch. I cannot believe I'm sitting here swooning over a stitch, but the 3-step zigzag is swoonable. Okay. The 3-step zigzag is so swoonable. I think it works well for knits and woven. It's my personal favorite for understitching, but it can be used to attach elastic. It's a very popular stitch in bra making. So when you are sewing under your bra band and you need to kind of flip it up to cover that band so it looks nice and clean and finish on the inside, that 3-step zigzag really makes a big difference. It's good for finishing edges. I also like it for stretch seams. Some people like it for their for applying elastic to underwear. I haven't found a great utility for it in that way for me personally, but because I prefer like the shorter, more narrow zigzag stitches that kind of cover the width of the elastic band or of the decorative elastic piece. But I can also see why this would also work well, because it's a great stitch. It distributes tension, it reduces puckering, it secures elastic while maintaining its stretch. It provides a wider coverage zone than a regular zigzag. And that is why I like it for my understitching. I think there's lots of ways to do understitching. Child, I think I saw someone do understitching with a fusible the other day. But the understitching, which I'm not going to knock it until I've tried it, I just think about the durability. So you can do understitching with just one line of stitching right next to that seam line. I prefer when I'm doing the understitching to have a wider base for it. I think it just helps it to hold a bit more robustly. I just really like it. Speaking of the opposite of a stitch I really like, the lightning stitch. Folks love them a lightning stitch. A lightning stitch is that very, very, very narrow zigzag that almost appears like a straight line. It has these tiny angled lightning shaped jagged type stitches. The way that people like to use it is for constructing knit. When you're putting knit garments together, it does maintain a flexible seam. It has a nice straight appearance while allowing stretch without breaking. That's, I think, an important element of the lightning stitch. The reason that I have such hard feelings about the lightning stitch is that it is a torment to unsew. That lightning stitch is designed to be tight. It is designed to stretch, but it is not designed to be unraveled easily. So that is one of the reasons why I'm just like, no, thank you. I want to turn now to some of the decorative and heirloom style stitches. These are things that may or may not require a separate foot. And your sewing machine might come with these. I am pretty sure that the $500 machine, as well as my machine, does come with a blind hem stitch foot. I don't know if that's the case for the $100, but they're not very expensive to get on your own. The way that the blind stitch works is that this is a zigzag stitch that alternates straight stitches with occasional side bites where the zigzag dives into the fabric. This is a nice way for hemming garments, and it's a good way to practice having a seam that can be nearly invisible from the outside. So that is what a blind hem stitch does. A relative of the blind hem stitch is the blanket stitch. I think those stitches are both related, except in the blanket stitch, you get stitch, stitch, stitch. When that jag, that little zig left stitch in a blind hem stitch is a V shape. The one for the blanket stitch is just one bite to the left side. So it's or it's a back and forth. It's a decorative stitch. There is another stitch that I want to talk about with a warning about language and vocabulary. This is called the faggoting stitch. Fagoting. It's a wide stitch that crosses back and forth between two fabric edges, leaving a teeny space in between. Now, the application for this is to put two pieces of finely finished lacework or delicate fabrics together with a stitch that lets them float apart. It's based on it comes from, I believe, the 13th century or the 1300s, 14th century, where the word faggot meant a bundle of sticks to burn. Then 200 years later, leave it to religious fanaticism and colonization to make the word faggot mean death. Truly, because that it was used to burn witches. So in 1631, there was this quote that I found from the Oxford English Dictionary. And I guess it was from someone, not a fiction. This was like apparently the life of the Duchess of Suffolk. And it quotes, if she recant not, I will faggot her, which means if she does not recant to being a witch or does not recant of her heresy, I will burn her alive. And I think it's because when you have a bundle, and it became also the way that word became a slang for cigarettes. And I think it's because when you have a bundle of wood or a bundle of something that is meant to burn, you also need to have space in between those pieces in order for the fire to flourish. And so I think that's where we get that faggoting stitch as having something that is stitched together, but also apart, just like a bundle of sticks. So I think that's joining two fabric edges and that gaps. And this creates this beautiful open work. It's really great for a decorative seam connection. The feather stitch is one that I think you might have seen as well on your machine. It's a repeating side to side stitch that branches like at an angle with Y shapes. That's great for decorative seams, for couching elastic. It's flexible, it's decorative, and it has a really nice structure to it. Now, I've talked about the zigzag stitch. I've talked about how to use the zigzag set at a stitch length of 0 to perform the installation of a button. You can put on buttons with the zigzag stitch, short stitch length, test the stitch width, and you can put it on with the machine. That is also the foundation of a satin stitch, which is a very dense zigzag forming a solid band. Now, you have probably definitely seen some satin stitches. Now, if you are watching this because you are on the Patreon, you can see even this Black Women Stitch patch right here has a satin stitch around it. And applique, monogramming, embroidery is one of the reasons that satin stitch is so popular. It does a great job of covering the edge. And this is something that also we can find in even the buttonholes, that the buttonhole, that those bar tacks at the end is a little tiny piece of a satin stitch because it's heavy. And when you go to open and close your buttons or buttonholes, you know that it's going to stay reinforced. You can also find the scallop stitch on your sewing machine. And this is a repeating curved pattern, which forms a shell-like edge. It is really pretty and delicate on like napkins, as well as when combined with lots of other things, makes for some really exciting patterns, edge finishes, and decorative hems. It's a visible decorative edge that you can get from again, one of the stitches that's already on your sewing machine. Now, I think it's also important to remember to practice. One way to do this is to keep a scrap bin of different fabrics. I have had an episode or two talking about sewing from the scrap bin. Y'all know I love a scrap bin. And the scrap bin here in this context means the scrap bin that you keep of the projects with offcuts from projects that you have made. These are those weird, odd, leftover offcuts that are too small to be anything for yourself or for the little people and pets in your life. These are these little odd shapes toss them in there and see if they come in handy. They come in handy for practice. This is a great chance to try different threads. You can pull out woven fabrics, knit fabrics, lightweight, heavy. Use the scraps to test these new to you stitches. Adjust the width, adjust the length, see what happens, compare results. Create a notebook with your samples in it, with the stitch name, width, and length, so that you know what you did and you can go back and look at it. Practice multiple zigzag stitches. See if you too will fall in love with the 3-step elastic zigzag. Or maybe, you know what, you could be the one to turn my life around with the lightning stitch. And you say, oh no, Lisa, I tried it and it really is a lifesaver. Give it another go. I will let you have that for yourself. So as we wrap up today's episode, talking about exploring your sewing machine and using the stitches you already have, just remember you can elevate your skills by using what you already have. Practice helps. It helps you to see what your sewing machine can do under different conditions. You could set aside some time, like, you know what, once a month, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes and just use stitches I've never tried before. Once you get the hang of it, and you want to do more, you can experiment with different needle combinations, thread weights. There is still plenty your machine can do already. And there is joy in being thankful for what you got. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolfork. I'm a 4th-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together.